This video is on female reproductive hormones or female gonadal hormones. This is related to the female reproductive system, therefore. Just a little bit background. We have 11 systems in our body, of which all the 10 systems are pretty much similar between males and females. The reproductive system is the only system which is very different between males and females. The structure, which is the anatomy of the female reproductive system, the function, both of them, the anatomy and the physiology part of the female reproductive system, is much more complicated. And as such, we will be going slowly throughout the entire chapter so that we understand about the hormones and its function in details. So just to let you know that the female phenotype develops spontaneously, apparently in the absence of gonadal hormone initially before birth. At puberty, however, the ovarian hormones or the gonadal hormones are essential for the development of the female secondary sex characters. And in addition, the gonadal hormone production is required for the cyclic release of the pituitary gonadal secretion or gonadal hormone secretion. And these hormones in turn help the female reproductive organs, especially the ovaries, to produce egg, induce ovulation, and in the uterus for the menstrual cycle. So let's understand the anatomy of the female reproductive system first, and then we'll go into the female gonadal hormones. So a brief overview, the female reproductive organ, one of the main ones, is the uterus. As you can see, this looks like an inverted picture with two arms on the side. Okay, these two arms are divided into three major parts. Number one is the infundibulum, then the ampulla, and the last one is called the isthmus or isthmus, whatever you can call them. It is called uterine tube or fallopian tube. One important information here is the end of the infundibulum. If you see this, this is like exactly like your arm. The arm ends into your palms with your fingers, and this also ends, this is the arm, and which ends with your arm. This is the arm which ends with your palm, with these other fingers. Okay, these are called fimbria. Very, very important structure for the entire process. The other thing to remember here is the uterus. As you can see, it looks like an inverted picture, has three major parts. The curved surface is known as a fundus. This is the body, and the opening is known as the cervix, which leads into the vagina. The vagina is the region where sperm is disposed, and they travel through the uterus, and the union or the final kiss between the ova and the sperm take place in the fallopian tube. The other important structure is the ovaries. So if you look in this, there are two ovaries, one on the right and the other is on the left. But remember, these ovaries do not touch the fimbria. I repeat again, the ovaries do not touch the fimbria, and ovaries are the organs which are responsible for production of ova, the female gamete. It is through a process of suction and a wave-like motion that these ova are released and taken up by the fimbria, and they then travel to the uterine tube. So a little bit of overview of the ovaries, if you can see. So I just want to let you know that it is about 1,000 to 2,000 primordial germ cells. What these are, we'll learn very soon. These are germ cells, so these are the stem cells. As you can see, they are present in the ovaries. and they undergo rapid proliferation and give rise to, in each ovary, about 3 million oocyte. Okay, so there are about 3 million oocytes take place, and this happens before birth. Okay, so at birth, this number is reduced drastically, and it becomes about 1 million in each of the ovaries. Okay, and at puberty, further they reduce, and about 250 to 300,000 oocytes are present around puberty. So remember, and a single ovum is usually ovulated during each reproductive cycle, which is the menstrual cycle, which leads into ovulation subsequently. About 400 to 500 oocytes are released from these ovaries, and remaining 99.9% ova are destroyed, which is known as a process of atresia. So women or females are born with a fixed number of ova, and they undergo a lot of changes in the reproductive cycle, and they're usually one ova mature during each cycle, and these ova are ultimately responsible for fertilization if they come in contact with a sperm. So we'll do this cycle of how the follicles mature very soon, but just to give you an idea of the ovaries. In addition, you must know that the ovary itself has two parts. One is the outer layer, as you can see it in here. This outer layer is where the oocyte maturation and division take place. This outer region is known as the cortex region, which is near the wall of the ovary. And the inner part, which is the medullary part, is the main part where there is vascularization, that is where the blood vessels are present. So the reproductive system of a female has two major events that go on. One is known as the ovarian cycle, and the other is known as the menstrual cycle. The ovarian cycle is related with the ovaries, and the menstrual cycle is related with the uterus. So I want you to understand this, okay? So I'm going to go back one slide so that you understand. So the ovarian cycle takes place in the ova in here, and the menstrual cycle actually takes place in the uterus in here. So these two cycles of ovarian cycle and the menstrual cycle that we're talking about, one in the ovaries, the other in the uterus, take place simultaneously. So it's very important to understand this. These two cycles take place simultaneously under the influence of hormones, and which is very, very critical. Without the influence of the hormones, these two cycles will not take place. So we'll start with the ovarian cycle. And in the ovarian cycle, there are three processes that go on simultaneously in order for this to be done successfully. Number one is oogenesis, that is formation of ova or mature ova. The second is folliculogenesis, which is development of follicles, which help in the next process, which is known as the hormonogenesis, which is production of hormones. So it's very important for you to understand that these two steps, which is the folliculogenesis and hormonogenesis, are very linked to each other, because the proliferation or division of follicles will lead to hormone production by the follicles themselves. And remember, it helps in the production of the gonadotropin hormones, which is LH and FSH, luteinizing hormone, and follicular stimulating hormone produced by the anterior pituitary under the influence of GnRH, which is gonadotropin releasing hormone produced from the hypothalamus. So we will do each one of them as we go along. So, what is ovarian cycle? The ovarian cycle is maturation of the egg throughout the monthly series. So, there are three steps that go on here. Number one is a follicular phase, which leads into the ovulation, and the third is the luteal phase. So, follicular phase starts from 1 to 14. Ovulation usually in a perfectly synchronized ovarian cycle takes place on day 14, and the luteal phase is between 14 to 28 days. So the ovarian cycle in total is of 28 cycle, starting with follicular phase, which is 1 to 14. On the 14th day, there is ovulation, and then goes on from 14 to 28 days, the luteal phase. This, I'm going to go in details on this slide again, but I just want to show you here a couple of things so that you understand that this oocyte maturation, which is oogenesis, is taking place simultaneously as the follicular genesis. And the process goes on under the influence of hormones, and we'll learn each one of them as we go along, okay? So before we move on, just remember that the ova, which is in the ovaries, remember, the ova, the stem cells for the ova is known as oogonia. Here we are talking before birth, okay? So the oogonia are the stem cells, okay? These are stem cells, they are diploid, that is 2n number, and they are actually, they further undergo mitotic division to form daughter cells, and they remain arrested in the prophase 1 of the mitotic division. That's very important to understand. And once they remain, they stop the division and remain arrested in that phase. And when at birth, what happens, as we know that many of the oocytes undergo, oogonia undergo atresia, that is they degrade. Only some of them are produced during birth. And then this, the oocyte, which is called the primary oocyte, they are in the prophase 1 of the mitotic division, which is very, very important to remember, okay? So subsequent division take place in the oocyte, and we'll go over that later on. But remember, these have not completed their division, and the child is born with an ova which is incomplete of the complete division of cell division before birth or at birth, okay? So at birth, the division is not completed, but eventually, as they go into the phase of puberty, where the hormones come into the picture, they undergo complete division. Okay, I'm going to come to this slide again. So this is the main slide for you to understand is how these two phenomena are taking place simultaneously. So if you look in here, so as I said, the stem cells are known as oogonia. They are diploid, and then these are then they undergo, which is known as the primordial follicle, okay? These primordial follicle is also diploid, and you can see in here there is a ova or egg, you can say, and it is surrounded by one layer of granulosa cell, one layer, and then there is a basement lamina which separates it with the rest of the interstitial fluid, okay? Gradually, these granulosa cells, what happens is they actually, after birth, what happens is these granulosa cells start to divide. These granulosa cells start to divide, and these granulosa cells produce, how do these start dividing? This is under the influence of a common aromatase enzyme that is present in the ovaries, and they are able to help in the division of these granulosa cells. Okay, these granulosa cells are dividing. Okay, when these granulosa cells are dividing, they start producing, which is called estrogen. The estrogen that is produced by these granulosa cells have two roles. Number one, they help the granulosa cell division itself. And number two is they can act, they go through the bloodstream. Remember, estrogen is a hormone, so it will pass through the bloodstream and they can affect the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary to produce two gonadal hormones, which is gonadotropins. One is LH, the other is FSH. So I repeat again, the granulosa cells that produce estrogen, these are the granulosa cells, and they produce estrogen in low amounts, of course, and they actually affect or they have a mechanism by which they can pass through the blood and affect the hypothalamus to produce GnRH, which is gonadotropin releasing hormone, which acts on the anterior pituitary to produce two hormones. One is known as the luteinizing hormone, the other is known as follicle stimulating hormone. So at this point, we are more interested in the follicle stimulating hormone because that's the one which is going to help in the proliferation of the granulosa cells. Okay, so these follicular cells or granulosa cells are now under the influence of FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, and they divide tremendously. Several layers you can see is formed. In addition to that, remember there is another hormone which is luteinizing hormone, which has its role, but at this point the role of LH is much less than that of the FSH. So FSH is acting on the follicle, they are acting on the granulosa cells in order to produce estrogen, and that in turn helping in the folliculogenesis and production of FSH and LH through the feedback mechanism. Now, in this entire process, what happens is there is formation of another layer which is known as the theca cells. Now, theca cells are two. Number one is theca externa and theca interna. And both of these are important form of layers in the production of estrogen. So what is happening in here, these theca cells are also actually helping in the production of estrogen. Why? Because the estrogen is required for this folliculogenesis to take place. It is also required for over-maturation, but we will do that a little later, okay? So I want you to understand that, let's go back. So these primordial cells, which had one granulosa cells, is under the influence of local aromatase to form the primary follicle, and they have started to divide and produce more granulosa cells. So there are different layers of granulosa cells are produced. By how? By two ways. Number one, they start producing estrogen under the influence of LH and FSH. So mainly FSH. FSH helps in the proliferation or division of these follicular cells, which forms multiple layers. And in addition to that, it forms a layer which are known as the thecal cells. And these thecal cells in addition help in the granulosa cells to produce estrogen. So let's understand this briefly and then we'll go back to this slide in this section again. So these are the thecal cells. As you can see, the thecal cells help in the conversion of cholesterol, which is a steroid, remember, helps in the steroidal hormone formation. Cholesterol is a starting material. The thecal LH acts on the thecal cells to convert cholesterol into androgen. And then since the thecal cell is just adjacent to the granulosa cells, so they can work hand in hand, the thecal cells transfer or convert the androgen to cholesterol to androgens, and then androgens then move into the granulosa cells, and under the influence of FSH, these granulosa cells then help in converting the androgens into estrogens, which then go into the systemic circuit and act at the level of hypothalamus. So remember, these estrogens are released from the granulosa cells, and they can go through the bloodstream to the brain, in the hypothalamus of the brain, act on the GnRH to produce LH and FSH, which in turn help in promoting the formation of estrogen. So this is one of the steps. In addition to that, what happens is during the same time, these granulosa cells actually form cavities which are filled with fluid, okay? These are cavities at this point. It is either you can call it tertiary follicle, you can call it Graafian follicle actually. There is a fluid-filled cavity formed, which is known as antrum. This fluid has glycoprotein in them and has high levels of hyaluronic acid in it, which is very, very important in the process of ovulation. Okay, so what we are learning here, we are learning about follicular genesis first, so you can understand how the follicles are maturing. And we said at this time it is known as a Graafian follicle, and the antrum is formed. I want you to remember one thing throughout this entire process, and as you can see it in here, the follicles are maturing, but these follicles or the ova is deprived of blood vessels, okay? So they are not in contact with the blood vessels yet. Okay, so we'll keep it from there. And then now I am going to go over, apart from the follicular genesis, what's happening in here with the ova. The ova is maturing, right? Along with the follicles. The ova, which was diploid or 2N, is maturing into primary follicle and then becomes secondary follicle. In this process, it covers itself by a wall, okay? It covers itself a wall, and this is not a Berlin Wall, this is not a Mexican wall, it is a zona pellucida wall, okay? This zona pellucida made up of glycoproteins forms like a shield around the ova, and we will see later on how this zona pellucida is it's if the ova is released from the follicular, the entire unit with the zona pellucida, and how sperm actually enters or penetrates through these zona pellucida when fertilization takes place. Okay, so remember this zona pellucida is it's like a guard, it's like a shield of the oocyte there. At this point, when it is a Graafian follicle, it has completed its division and is ready for fertilization. So once this is ready, remember it is still trapped into within the follicles. As you can see it in here, you can see this is the ova, which is a mature ova at this time. It has completed the first division, which at this point it is at a meiosis 2 of metaphase phase of meiosis 2. So it is at this point and it is ready for it to come out. So what is important to understand here is there are 3 processes that are going on simultaneously. One is the follicular genesis, that is the follicles are maturing. Number 2 is the ova is maturing. And number 3, the hormones are acting on it in order for these processes to take place. So just a review again, and we will then go into further is, as I said, this is oogonia, the stem cells. Then they divide to form the primary oocyte, and the first meiotic division begins and then stops here. It's in prophase, one division, and at birth, they are released as such. And then what happens as it becomes the Graafian follicle at this point, you can see the ova, it further divides and remains trapped in the metaphase 2 of the division. Okay, the division has been completed, so there are 23 pairs of chromosomes in here. One forms the polar body. This is the secondary oocyte. The polar body actually further degenerates, and the secondary oocyte is now ready to be fertilized by a sperm. And what is happening in the follicular end? This is, as we said, these are known as the primordial follicle, and as such they are released. And there's primordial follicles after puberty, they under the influence of LH-FSH, they form primary follicles which are ready now to produce estrogen, which in turn helps in the production of LH and FSH. They undergo secondary follicle, which becomes the tertiary or Graafian follicle. At this point, there is formation of the zona pellucida around the ova also, and the follicle has accumulated fluid, which is known as antrum. Both of this, together with the follicle, the mature ova, which is this in here, is now ready to be spit out from the ovaries. Okay, so this process by which the ova is released from the ovaries or kicked out of the ovaries is known as ovulation, and we'll learn about that in subsequent slides. So these are just what we have learned so far. So just go over this slide thoroughly so that you understand it better. Okay. So here we are talking about ovulation. Couple of questions that come into the picture in the process of ovulation is, how does ovulation take place? I'm going to go to the next slide and come to this again. So there are three questions that needs to be understood. Number one, how is ova released? Number two, what causes the LH surge? And number three is, what is a dominant ovarian follicle? Okay, so we'll do all of them as we go along the slides. Okay, so I'm going back the slide so that we understand. So, as we said, the ova is now ready to be spit out. Okay, so the ova of there are many follicles that are present in the ovaries, but there are only few of them that have mature ova. Okay, some of the follicles just get atretic, they die out, and of which there are only few of them that are ready for ovulation. And usually there is only one ova produced per cycle, but there may be 2 or 3 or maybe few hundreds also. So which hormone now comes into the picture? It is LH, luteinizing hormone. The luteinizing hormone actually initiates acute changes in steroids and echinocytes metabolism in the granulosa cells of mature follicles. So the follicles that were mature, now LH is coming into the picture to act on these follicles. What it does, it increases the local prostaglandin concentration. It increases platelet activating factor and other vasoactive agents that are that cause subsequent dilation of the capillaries in the thicker internal of the follicular cell. So if you remember, I said that these follicular cells and the ova do not have blood capillaries. Okay, so let's go back a slide. It will be just easier to understand. At this point, we said that these do not have blood capillaries, and you will see as we come closer to the Graafian follicle, blood vessels are coming in near the granulosa cells. So the LH actually is helping to increase the local prostaglandins, lipoxins, kinase, and then platelet activating factors. And this actually causes dilation of the capillaries of the thicker internal of the follicular cells. So these are the thicker internal cells. They cause dilation. As such, these blood vessels can now penetrate through them. Okay, this is a significant change in the capillaries of the ovulating follicles, which results in fourfold increase in the volume of the ovarian vascular compartment. So there is a huge influx of blood vessels now in these Graafian follicles. To remember, the permeability of the thecal capillaries increases to the extent. Now, these capillaries that are coming in, they extend in the serum protein to a huge number. As a result, what happens is there is increased amount of active fibroblast. It has been, thought or hypothesized that these serum proteins or fibroblasts are essential, and they activate they start secreting a very important protease, which is known as metalloproteinase, which is able to degrade, or at this point, these metalloprotease are able to degrade the extracellular matrix of the collagenous connective tissue of the follicular wall. So they are able to break this wall, the basal laminar wall that was there throughout. They're able to, this metallopeptidase are able to break this wall. As such, they are able to cause the ova to be released. Okay, so at this point, what we are learning that the follicular phase is over, the ova is mature, and now the ova needs to go out of the follicles of the ovaries, and that is done by these scissor proteins that you can call them, which are proteases, which is metalloproteases. They are able to chop down the connective tissue surrounding it. As such, the ova can come out. It has been seen that there are two enzymes which are rate limiting in this entire process. One is known as the prostaglandin. The other is known as cyclooxygenase 2 or COX-2. Not fully understood, but it has been seen in mice that in the absence of these two factors, ovulation does not take place. Now, the question is, the ova is ready, the metallopeptidase is ready. Now we are talking about the process of ovulation, right? So we have learned this. There are tons and tons of follicles that are present. Some remain in the resting phase and die out. Some grow. Some atretic, they die out. Degrade out, and there are growing follicles, right? So many of the follicles are growing. Even within these growing follicles, majorly most of them are atretic, that is, they die out. But of the ones that are growing, there is one, it is the main one, or you can say the leader actually grows further, and when it grows further, it goes into a point of ovulation. They ovulate, that is the process by which egg is spilled out or spit out of the follicles or from the ova is known as ovulation. one important thing to understand in here, I'm going to the next slide, is these three processes is going on simultaneously, right? So let's go over this slowly again so that you understand. So these are the oogonium, and then they divide to form the primary follicles, and you can see the oogonia are in it, and they are in the 2N stage. These primary follicule then undergo primordial follicle, then form primary follicle. These are nothing but granulosa cells. These granulosa cells then form under the influence of FSH. Remember, these granulosa cells are responsible for production of estrogen, and then they are slowly and steadily producing another layer, which is known as the thecal layer. The thecal layer is mainly responsible for production of estrogen in high amounts, such that they can have a negative feedback loop on the GnRH and LH. Initially, they facilitate, so they are, they act at the level of hypothalamus to produce GnRH, LH, FSH, which act on the follicles to produce more and more estrogen. Now, what is happening? This is under the influence of FSH primarily, and it results in what is known as the granulosa cells. At this point, there is formation of antrum, the fluid-filled cavity, which is helping in the process of ovulation. The process of ovulation, this process is not happening in every follicular cell. Only maybe 1 or 2 cells, or maximum in maybe few tens or hundreds. Okay, so there is something called the dominant follicle. Okay, so what is the dominant follicle? Although many follicles may begin to mature during each ovarian and follicular or menstrual cycle, typically only one single follicle sustain its inherent gametogenesis potential. So how the gamete will be produced, the gametogenic potential to produce the gamete and to let it go into, let it go out of the ovary has the potential. Only one or a very few number have that potential. Under the influence of gonadotropins, this progression happens and follicular maturation take place, right? The follicular maturation take place. 99.9% of the follicles die out. As you can see, they are dying out, but only one of them go into a point where it is released. Okay, as we learned, this is only possible because there are the blood invagination takes place, or vascularization of the follicles at this point take place, and there is presence of metallopeptidase, which helps in basically chopping off the follicles and the thecal and the basal lamina, so that the ova can be released. Now, a couple of things to understand here. The ova, the follicle, which is the follicle which is going to be the mature one. Okay, the follicle that eventually matures and ovulate is thought to be the one of those granulosa cells that have high levels of aromatase. Okay, so what does aromatase do? Aromatase converts androgens into estrogens. So these are the ones that have high levels of aromatase. They have a ton of LH receptors in them, and number 3 is they are follicles that are responsive to low levels of FSH. I want you to understand this well. 3 things. Number 1, high levels of aromatase. Number 2, LH, increased amount of LH receptors. Number 3, follicle that are responsible for the low levels of FSH. Why? Remember, at this point, the levels of FSH is low. Okay, So, but it is required, okay? So why it is low? Because at this point, there is formation of another layer around here, which is known as corona radiata, and they are able, or these cells along with them, are able to produce a hormone known as inhibin B. The inhibin B, again, passes through the blood vessels and is able to inhibit the FSH release, okay? So once the FSH release is stopped, the follicular genesis slows down, okay? It slows down. But remember, it is required because we do need estrogen. And for estrogen formation, it is absolutely necessary that we do have FSH, okay? So these are cells that are responsive to low levels of FSH. So what it means is even when the levels of FSH are low, they can still function. Okay, so three factors are required. One is high levels of aromatase. Number two, increased level of LH and LH receptors. And the third is they are responsive to low levels of FSH. All these three together makes it the dominant ovarian follicle, which goes to its maturity and then does the process of ovulation. So the ova is released. What is left behind is known as corpus luteum. This corpus luteum is very, very important, remember, because number one, it produces a hormone which is known as progesterone, which is very important for implantation and pregnancy. And number two, it is the byproduct or what is left behind of the follicles. So this actually answers all our three questions. So how is ova released? We just learned how the invagination of blood vessels take place, how there is increased levels of lipokinins, prostaglandins, kinases, platelet activating factor, vasoactive agents collectively, all of them help in increasing the vascularization. And when vascularization increases, there is increased fibroblast formation. These increased fibroblast formation are able to secrete now metallopeptidases, which causes the ova to be released. What causes LH surge? Now, this is important. Now, I want you to understand this. Let's see. So, couple of things to understand here is when there is low levels of estrogen, estrogen can actually act at the level of LH and FSH and cause a negative feedback loop, okay? Now, when so let's understand how the process of ovulation takes place under the influence of LH. So we have learned that how these follicles are growing. These are the primordial follicles, primary follicles, secondary follicles, and the Graafian follicle. This is in the mid-cycle when the levels of estrogens are increasing by the follicles, not elevated, but estrogen levels, increase in the estrogen levels causes a negative feedback loop on the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary. Hypothalamus produces GnRH, which in turn acts on the anterior pituitary to produce LH and FSH. When there is a slightly elevated release of estrogen, this causes a negative feedback loop. As such, the LH and FSH lowers the level. Again, when the estrogen levels are higher, then LH will be lower in release. And the reverse happens when the levels of estrogen becomes less, and then higher levels of LH and FSH will be produced in order for the cells to mature. And as we know that the follicular cells require FSH in order to go to a point of maturity. That part we have learned so far. But now we are learning that among these all follicles, there is one, the most competent one, which is known as a dominant ovarian follicle, grows to a point of maturity because it has high levels of aromatase, it has increased level of LH receptors, and it is able to respond to low levels of FSH. So this dominant follicle now causes the release of estrogen in high levels, very high levels. And this high levels of estrogen levels, not only what it, just remember, this is very interesting. Initially, low levels of estrogen was causing a negative feedback loop. Now this high level of estrogen causes a positive feedback loop. What does the positive feedback loop means? It means that this high levels causes an increased level of LH, which is known as LH surge. This drastic increase in LH, and this drastic increase in LH is responsible for the process of ovulation or release of ova from its the follicle. Okay, what is left behind is known as corpus luteum. Corpus luteum, as I said, it produces progesterone and also inhibin, and they are able to then again act at the level of GnRH and LH-FSH. Okay, so this mechanism actually, the positive and the negative feedback loop in case of ovarian function is very critical. So remember, these are some of the very few examples where the same hormone is acting in such a way that both these feedback loops work. And remember, both these feedback loop is essential for the entire ovarian cycle to take place. Okay, so going back to the three questions, now we have learned how the ova is released, we know how the LH surge happens, and now we know what is a dominant follicle and what's its function. The ovarian steroid hormones. The ovarian follicle is a source of three hormones, okay? Three steroid hormones. Number one, progesterone, androgens, and estrogens. So the relative amount of each of these steroids vary throughout the menstrual cycle and the ovarian cycle. During the follicular phase of the menstrual cycle, estrogen is a major steroid hormone secreted by the ovary, whereas during the luteal phase and during pregnancy, progesterone is the major steroid hormone secreted. So it has been thought that estrogen biosynthesis requires androgen, and this is hypothesized. This is a two-cell theory which involves two cells like the thecal cells and the granulosa cells. And how the formation or synthesis of estrogen happens is what we are learning here. The two-cell theory of estrogen production suggests that the C19 production, which is androgen, is produced from the cholesterol, which is C27, under the presence of this enzyme called 17-hydroxylase. The thecal cells produce large amount of androgens, okay, in the presence of this enzyme, because it has this gene called CYP17 gene that encodes 17-hydroxylase enzyme, which is 17-hydroxylase lyase enzyme, and is highly regulated by LH, okay. Granulosa cells, on the other hand, have very little or almost like no capacity in producing these androgens, okay? So this conversion is required in the presence of this enzyme, and once the androgen is produced, it then migrates to the granulosa cell, which is next to it, And in the presence of aromatase, where granulosa cells produce aromatase in large amounts, it is converted into estrogen. Now, estrogen can then go into the circulation or can be the antral cavity for its action. This is like a brief overview. If you look at a more detailed formation of estrogen formation, which is in the slide. So again, remember, this is the thecal cell and this is the granulosa cell, and they are divided by the basal lamina. And as we know that the thecal cell have LH receptors. On the other hand, the granulosa cell have FSH receptors, okay? So the thecal cells, which have the LH receptors, are able to convert the cholesterol in the presence of 17-hydroxyhydrolase lyase to androgen. And this androgen then actually then goes into the circulation and to the granulosa cells, via the basal lamina. And this androgen in the presence of P450 is then converted into estrogen. Okay, this estrogen production is facilitated by follicle-stimulated hormone. Remember, this helps in the conversion of androgen to estrogen and in the production of aromatase. And so once estrogen is produced, then actually it goes into the follicular fluid and can actually then act at the level of the brain, the hypothalamus, pituitary, and then subsequently at the ovarian level also. Okay, so this is the simplified version of it to show you how it works. As you can see, this is the thecal cell, these are the granulosa cell, same thing in here. And cyclic AMP conversion to pKa, which helps in conversion of cholesterol to androgen or androstenedione, which goes through the blood, through the basal lamina to the granulosa cells, where it is converted into estradiol. And estradiol is then, remember again, this aromatase formation is influenced by the cyclic AMP pathway, also because granulosa cell has FSH receptors, which promotes the conversion or formation of aromatase and conversion of androgen into estrogen. And estrogen then goes subsequently into the system for further action. So this actually basically concludes the first part of this lecture. We will continue into the menstrual cycle.